Sharon, you've been involved with the former Soviet Union and Russia for over 33 years, and you've actually worked in the Ukraine. What can you tell us about your experience in Ukraine?
We started working in Ukraine in 1984. Gorbachev came in 1985, if that gives you a perspective on time. And we were delighted to be able to meet the Ukrainian people in the streets, young people generally that introduced themselves first, asked us what we were doing there, took us to their apartments. We began a close relationship then that lasted for the next 10 years. And we also had a small office there, which meant we had our setup in somebody's apartment. And we had a little director there, and she was always active making things happen for us when we would bring Americans to Russia and to Ukraine or to Georgia or whichever republics we were going to. And they were seeming like to me that they were much freer than Russians. They were able to do the types of interaction with foreigners that Russians felt a little bit uncomfortable with in the beginning. And the city was beautiful. Kiev was lovely. Any place else that went outside the city was lovely. And I don't know, there was a special magic for me with the Ukrainians, and there still is. I didn't get any sense of this mentality of the former relationships with the Nazis. There was none of that around. You know, I think that the Soviet Union was so overpowering to the population that it forced peoples together that otherwise would not have chosen to be together. They didn't have choice. If they didn't cooperate with each other or with the system, then they had problems, big problems. And so I think this may be the reason why that none of this really surfaced, none of this ill will between the Ukrainians ever surfaced as long as the Soviet Union was in existence, because it couldn't. I didn't get a sense of it surfacing even shortly after the Union fell apart. But obviously today we have the severe remnants of these two very different types of populations that are warring with each other. And it's just such a shame to me because I love those people and still want the best for them. Mm-hmm. And yet I understand how difficult it is for them to live in the same country together now.
Mm-hmm. Sharon, you have a map here. Can you show us something about the history of Ukraine so that Americans can understand what is actually the problem here?
Well, some of it, yes.
Okay.
Let me show you. This is a map I've had for a long time. You can see that Russia goes from here over around Lithuania and Latvia all the way across the half of the world to the other side of the Pacific Ocean. Covers 11 time zones. From here on over, only has 10% of the population. Here is 90% of the population. Of course, the capital, Moscow, is here. And you can see this is Belarus. Down here, you see Ukraine. This is the point of contention now, severe contention. I think you can see these borders here, though they're not completely outlined for us. Ukraine sits at on the underbelly of Russia. This is the area here where the Europeans have invaded Russia for many, many centuries. Of course, they're extremely sensitive to these borders. It was Gorbachev's intention to get an agreement from Reagan that if at the end of the Cold War, and when the Berlin Wall came down, if the wall could come down, he wanted the assurance that America would never put the NATO forces close to his borders. That was something that was given verbally, but it was never written. And unfortunately, it was not regarded for very long after the wall came down and the nation imploded. But at any rate, it's very easy for us Americans to understand this because we know how we would feel if Russians, the Warsaw Pact was still in effect, and if they were situated across the borders of Canada and across the Mexican borders, we would be very leery about that. Hence, Russia is very leery about having NATO now up here in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, not in Belarus, and the fear of having it in Ukraine. This is a huge problem for them. And then, of course, it's over here, it's in Poland, in Hungary, and these other countries, and partially in Germany. NATO is the largest military operation ever known in the world. And you can imagine what it feels like for Russia to feel the presence of this along most of its borders as it faces Europe.
Sharon, I think Russia has a long history of being invaded, so naturally they're sensitive to the integrity of their borders.
Of course, the invasions have come through here. Well, this is the property. This is the area that we're talking about. Absolutely, they wiped Russia out, and how could they not be afraid of this? But we don't take that into consideration. Maybe because nobody's ever approached our borders with a large military operation.
And could you point out where Moscow is again on this map?
Yes, Moscow is here, and you can see how close this is to the border of Ukraine. They could get missiles here in 10 seconds. Just amazing. So we have to understand this as we try to come to grips with why Russia is doing what they're doing.
So tell us about the crisis in Ukraine now. What is the conflict about, and where is it in Ukraine?
Well, the conflict is on both ends of Ukraine, and in the middle too. But the major conflict is here, where West Ukraine sits next to Poland, over here next to Hungary, close to Austria and Germany, and these are the countries that had people in Ukraine many years ago, and ended up getting taken in into the Soviet Union when the divisions of land came upon the three leaders of the winners of World War II. And this group fought against Russia and the Soviet Union in World War II. It was a hideous war for the Soviet Union to recover from. And of course, as you well probably know from our press, I think we're beginning to leak the information that these people, many of these people in this area right here, are sympathists with the Nazi regimes. And they're still pushing forward this kind of policy in Ukraine. Now, the people over here on the east side of Ukraine, most of them are ethnic Russians. And certainly it's an ethnic Russian society. They speak the Russian language. They are Russian Orthodox. They consider themselves a part of Russian culture. They don't necessarily want to be part of Russia. They're Ukrainians. But still, they want to be closely associated with Russia. Also, this is where the major part of the large industries are in the country, in the whole of Ukraine. This part over here is more agricultural. This is more industrial over here. It's where the money was made, or was made before this war. They intend to keep their Russian culture. They do not want to be dominated by a culture that has basically pro-Nazi people in it, making decisions for it, and refusing to let them speak Russian language, and basically dislike them intensely because they're connected with Russia. So you can see that this is a country right here that is divided against itself.
Where is the conflict taking place? Is it focused in any one area in Ukraine?
Do you mean the war?
Yes.
It's all taking place over here. The Western Ukrainians have come across Ukraine and have come here, and they're attacking these cities over here in southeast Ukraine.
And what part does Russia have in this?
Well, that's a good question, and you'll get two different answers on that depending upon who you talk with. Russia has been doing a lot with regard to trying to help ameliorate some of the problems that are going on with this war. It has been told in our media that convoys of Russian troops have come across the borders, that they're bringing tanks and weapons of all sorts. Then this is discounted by the Europeans who are watching this and monitoring those borders. They say no real battalions of troops have come over. We have only seen individual Russians who are coming over to fight in the war. Now, you have to understand that many of the people that are living up here in Russia feel themselves Ukrainian. And they are from Ukraine. Their parents are still in Ukraine. And so they are highly bothered by the fact that this war is going on, and the young men are crossing borders down here, coming into Ukraine, fighting with the East Ukrainians against the West Ukrainians. There is no war going on up here in West Ukraine. It's all going on down here. This should tell you something.
You know, the media gives us the impression that somehow Russia was responsible for this war.
Well, there are two very different scenarios. And yes, Washington and Western Russia will give you, Western Ukraine gives us in our daily news a decided picture that says Russia is the big culprit, Putin is the big culprit, and it's all their fault or his fault. This would have never happened. Of course, this is not necessarily the way other people look at it.
What part does the Crimea play in this?
Crimea plays a huge part in this, but it's just another piece of the action. Crimea is where Russia has its only warm water port. It has been a part of the Russian Empire for about 250, 300 years. In 1954, it was given by Khrushchev, a Ukrainian, who was at that time the General Secretary of the Communist Party in Moscow and for the whole Soviet Union. So Crimea was given without a referendum, without asking the people, with just simply nothing except Khrushchev wanted to make a gift. And so it was gifted to Ukraine, where it's been ever since, until it was annexed.
What do the Crimean people want in this conflict?
Well, the Crimean people had a referendum that most of the world considers legitimate. And by the way, they're talking now about doing a second referendum with the Crimean people. And I think this is a wonderful, wonderful idea. And we need to have all sorts of people from around the world coming to observe that election process just to make sure it's correct. But the first one that was held, I think in March, 95%, 95 or 97% of the population voted to go with Russia. Now, they have a 12% Tatar population there. And the word is that the Tatars didn't even bother to vote. If they boycotted the election or the referendum, I can understand how they would have gotten a 95%, because the rest of them were ethnic Russians.
Sharon, does it make any sense to ask, what do the Ukrainian people really want?
Well, of course it makes sense to us, but it doesn't make much sense to the Western Ukrainians. Because as far as they're concerned, the whole country needs to go along with what they decide needs to happen. And of course, what they would like to do is chase all the Russians back up into Russia. And by the way, 1 million of them have already taken refuge in Russia to get themselves away from the war, particularly women and children.
Why is the situation in Ukraine so dangerous?
Well, it's dangerous because there's a war going on. And as the troops come through across here, they are also warring on other populations. For instance, when they came through Odessa.
I mean, dangerous for the world situation.
Well, it's dangerous simply because if they ever decide to get themselves into a war with Russia, we face the possibility of a nuclear war. And I think this is the only thing that's kept that from happening so far, is that everybody understands that nobody would be the winner out of this.
Mm-hmm. Where do we stand in the Ukrainian crisis today? This is March 15th, 2015. Where do we stand today? The situation is so volatile, it changes so quickly. What is your understanding of this current situation?
Well, today, the Minsk II agreement is holding. That's the one that says, please back off and don't anybody fire at the other side. There was a Minsk I, and it never really got off the ground. But Minsk II, so far, is holding. I think this is probably because President Obama understands the consequences of going much further with this war. I hope that Washington is going to be backing off their support for the Western Ukrainians. I think that it's the only reasonable thing to do, given the situation is so dire, and Ukraine is in such bad shape, and there's not any way that they can muster armies together any longer because there aren't that many people that, in Ukraine who want to fight with the West. And so the young men who are being drafted are taking off for all sorts of other places in order to not have to fight that war. Or if they go, they end up over here, and many of them give their weapons away and just simply start supporting the other side. They have lost tons of tanks and equipment to this army over here because they're not willing really to. Not that many of them are willing to fight their own brothers. It's just a devastating situation.
Sharon, is there anything that we as Americans can do about this situation?
What can we do about this situation? Well, certainly as far as politically, we should be demanding of our president and our Congress that they withdraw support for the Western Ukrainians and that they find some way to get a consolidation of nations who will be willing to help this country rebuild itself now that the war has destroyed so much of it. How do we do this? I think we do it by getting in touch with our Congress members. We do it with signing a lot of the declarations and petitions that are going around now that says, get us out of this war. We don't want any part of it. We spread the word that this is not something we want to be involved in. Ukraine is not a country that we have any relationship with at all in a negative way. There's nothing to gain by having a war in Ukraine for the United States. And there certainly is nothing to gain if it's going to go nuclear. So yes, I think, in the Vietnam War, finally the public opinion changed and it basically began questioning why we were in that war, questioning to the point where the current military strategists had to come off of their perches where they were continuing to fight this war. And it came to an end. And I think we're going to have something like this in Ukraine.
Yeah, Sharon, in order for any citizen to be really effective in the world, that citizen needs to know the truth about what's going on. Where should we go for news that isn't biased? Do you feel that Americans are being told the truth of what's going on?
Well, we're told maybe 1/10 of the truth. And I don't think that this is unusual, Mel. As I look around and see what's going on with some of the other newspapers in the world, I can see that generally the national newspapers of most countries will go along with whatever the leaders will positions are. And only when they get just sick and tired of it, like Germany is right today, will they begin venturing out and putting other points of view in their news. Der Spiegel, which is the largest news outfit in Germany, has just in the last couple of weeks began to really question seriously what Germany is supporting in this war with the Western Ukrainians. And so I think that this is coming pretty quickly. It wouldn't be at all surprising to me if some of the other nations began the same thing, particularly France. There are a couple of others that could turn immediately. So if that happens, then we will have to pull off of our one approach message on this war.
What would you like to tell Americans about Vladimir Putin's handling of the crisis in Ukraine?
Oh my gosh.
I know it can be a volatile subject, but
Yeah.
But you have your own opinions, so you've researched this area quite diligently and you're familiar with what maybe media biases. So tell us the truth from your point of view.
Well, my point of view is colored by the fact that I have met Putin, spent time with him. I know the people that he went to school with as a boy. I know what kind of person they say he was. Of course, I've read his biography. And by the way, you can get it through Amazon. It's a short piece of work, but at any rate, it tells exactly who he was at the year 2000 when he took the presidency over. I've talked with numerous, hundreds, I guess, entrepreneurs whose businesses he registered in the early days of St. Petersburg's entrepreneurial community and their attempts to make a private sector there. They say without question, and I've asked each one of them, what'd you have to pay for a bribe? And they tell me they never had to pay for a bribe as long as they went to Putin's desk. I know American businessmen who have worked with him throughout the years and when he was in St. Petersburg, and they say they have never been able to see anything other than a person who really tried to help business to develop, didn't take bribes, was always there to be supportive with whatever needs that they had of the Russian government. And then what can I say? You know, when you've had an experience with somebody, you don't tend to just deny that experience and take up with whatever recent messages are being propagated through mainstream media. And so I personally have watched his speeches throughout the years that he has been president, since 2000, because I was so interested in this character coming to power that I had already met and spent some time with. And so I have to say his speeches have been right on mark. He has never been braggy about anything. He's very modest in his speeches. He gives very specific details about what needs to come next. So they're not hypey kinds of propaganda talks. They're very real talks with the Russian people and abroad. So yeah, I have to say he's done a good job of leading Russia, whether we like it or not. He's done a good job, but I think we need to stop the demonizing, because this tells more about us than it tells about him.
Right.
Because most of the people demonizing haven't had any experience with him at all. They know nothing personally themselves, nor have they talked with any people who have had any dealings with him. So, I'm very suspicious of all of this.
Sharon, what would you advise President Obama to do with this tragic involvement?
Well, I've said before that he needs to back off of support for the Western Ukrainians. This is, unless he wants permanent war there. And I can't see how that would benefit any American citizen to be in a continuing war in Ukraine. It's fraught with dangers because our weapons are on high alert, nuclear weapons. Their weapons are on high alert, and anything can happen in a period like this. We need to be cooperating with Russia. Russia could help us solve the problems of the 21st century better than any other country on the planet. Why in the world we're picking a fight with them, I cannot imagine.
Well, why can they be so helpful? How can they be so helpful?
Well, they can help us with global warming. They can help us first and foremost with terrorism, because they know much more about terrorism and how to ferret it out than we do. It was they who told us about the Boston bombers before they ever struck. I mean, these kinds of things are self-evident. Mm-hmm. We need to be cooperating and not criticizing these people.
What kind of national policy do we need to guarantee the future of this world?
A cooperative one. One that tries to not use war as a solution, but to use peacemaking efforts as solutions. One that recognizes that there's not any way that the military is going to be able to solve a problem for long. It just creates more problems. There would be no ISIS today if it weren't for our invasion of Iraq. So when are we going to learn these lessons? We've got to wake up and realize that we're in the 21st century, and what worked in the 20th century no longer works, and it's far more dangerous than it was in the 20th century.
Sharon, you're passionate in your intention to somehow create a win-win relationship between the superpowers. Would you talk to us about this passion you've had as a result of your having gone to the Soviet Union and talking with the Russian people and getting a White House appointment to help the Russian people in their involvement with Americans? How can we bring about this win-win relationship between the superpowers that the superpowers seem incapable of bringing about themselves?
I don't have a good answer for that, but I know what I did the first time. And
Okay.
I just simply started taking American citizens to the Soviet Union when the Soviets couldn't travel here. But then things changed, which I would have never dreamed. And by 1988, we were allowed, under communism, we were allowed to bring Russian citizens here to the United States. We brought them to 264 different cities where we said, sit down and talk with the Rotary clubs and your churches and your temples and your business houses or whatever. Talk and see if you want to be enemies with each other. And then the consensus was nobody wanted to be enemies with each other. They loved each other when they got together. So who knows? Maybe it's the starting of citizen diplomacy again, or citizen-to-citizen trips again, will fire up some sort of imagination within American minds. I'm taking a group in May, June to 4 different regions of Russia with the hope that magic will start again, because magic literally did start the first time we did this.
It started with a simple idea that you thought was impossible.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was impossible at the time.
And our current crisis seems to be impossible, doesn't it?
Well, it looks like it is, but since I learned that nothing is impossible from that first experience, and I got to see the benefits of it over a 30-year period, I still look at the situation today and I say it's not impossible. There is a way to change this. And now I have to search for the ways it would work in the 21st century instead of the 20th century. And so I'm just starting where I know to start, which is getting Americans to Russia and helping them to have face-to-face conversations, discussion periods with Russians themselves. We're not taking a tour of palaces. We don't have an in-tourist bus. We are simply going straight to the people, and I'm setting up meetings in every city where we go, where they will be able to have direct conversations with each other. God knows what will come out of it. I don't know. But I'm hoping that many things will happen. And particularly in these days when we've got internet, which we didn't have in the 80s, there's a possibility that really great magic could happen.
And you have the faith and belief that you can do something.
Well, I have the wish and and the knowledge that it happened once. And so maybe it can happen again.
Sharon, you've done wonders with impossible ideas, and perhaps this idea you have can have unexpected results.
I hope and pray.
Sharon, thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome. Thank you for being interested.
Yeah. Your impossible idea might have fantastic results. Who knows?